Fearful Symmetry Fridays number 14. This week I want to focus on a section in chapter 10 of Northrop Frye's Fearful Symmetry, section 6 in chapter 10. And not even the whole section of 6, but just some of it. There's a lot of interesting ideas here about what we are as human beings, our place in the universe, a lot of metaphorical stuff that you need to understand in order to understand Blake's epic poems. And here on the screen I have a little snippet from The Four Zoas, which was an epic that Blake never published. So it's an unpublished epic, and Northrop Frye says it's one of the best works in English literature that was never published, that nobody ever reads. I don't even think he said that it's the best that was never published. I think he said it's the best that no one ever reads, and it should be read more. So something along those lines. So I thought there were some really interesting phrases here and interesting descriptions. The study of angels and the workmanship of demons, when heaven and hell in emulation strove in sports of glory. I'm going to read this whole paragraph here, then I'm going to give you some more context, because it goes into this part of the Fearful Symmetry where he's trying to describe our metaphorical being and how Blake was describing it. And don't forget that your reason is sort of Blake's description of the Old Testament Jehovah, and it's not exactly what you might call a Christian interpretation of the God of the Old Testament. So Blake says, "Then seized the sons of Urizen the plough. They polished it from rust of ages. All its ornament of gold and silver and ivory reshone across the field immense, where all the nations darkened like mold in the divided fallows, where the weed triumphs in its own destruction. They took down the harness from the blue walls of heaven, starry, jingling, ornamented with beautiful art, the study of angels, the workmanship of demons, when heaven and hell in emulation strove in sports of glory. The noise of rural work resounded through the heavens of heavens. The horses neigh from the battle, the wild bulls from the sultry waste, the tigers from the forests, and the lions from the sandy deserts. They sing. They seize the instruments of harmony. They throw away the spear, the bow, the gun, the mortar. They level the fortifications. They beat the iron engines of destruction into wedges. They give them to Urthona's sons, ringing the hammer's sound in dens of death, to forge the spade, the mattock, and the axe, the heavy roller to break the clods, to pass over the nations. The sons of Urizen shout, their father rose. The eternal horses harnessed they call to Urizen. The heavens move at their call. The limbs of Urizen shone with ardor. He laid his hand on the plough. Through dismal darkness drove the plough of ages, over cities and all their villages, over mountains and all their valleys, over the graves and caverns of the dead, over the planets, over the void spaces, over sun and moon, and star and constellation." So now I'll start the part from chapter 10, section 6. Northrop Frye is explaining again the metaphors that William Blake uses in his epics. The apocalypse speaks of a millennium, a 1,000-year period of peace and security at the end of the 6,000 years of history, corresponding to the day of rest which followed the 6 days of creation. But all through the millennium, apparently a gigantic power of evil, symbolized by the giants Gog and Magog, consolidates, and the struggle between the divine and satanic principles called Armageddon does not stop short of a final assault on the stars. Those whose vision ends with a millennium, or utopia, established in this world are still looking to history and the law, except that they put their golden age and their idealized legal contract in the future instead of the past. Just as the tyranny of the past is the heart of all tyranny, however, so the mystery of the future is the heart of all mystery, and to judge our actions in terms of the perfunctory and generalized gratitude of posterity is merely inverted Phariseeism. But if the past can be recreated into the present, so can the future, and if the creative life begins, as we are told in the 4 Zoas, with the merging of imagination and history, it must end, as we are told in Jerusalem, with their separation, when time no longer exists. Jerusalem, just as a side note, is Blake's other epic poem. He's got Jerusalem, Milton, and the 4 Zoas. I believe those are the 3 major ones. This brings us to the other aspect of the illumination of Milton and Blake, the vision of the world as the labor of loss displayed at the end of the first book. The natural man is, speaking in terms of conscious vision, an imaginative seed. Just as the seed is a dry sealed packet of solid matter, so the natural mind is a tight skull-bound shell of abstract ideas. And just as the seed is surrounded by a dark world, which we see as an underworld, so the physical universe, which surrounds the natural man on all sides and is dark in the sense that he cannot see its extent, is the underworld of the mind, the den of Urthona, the cave of Plato's Republic. The majority of seeds in nature die as seeds, and in human life all natural men, all the timid, all the stupid, and all the evil, remain in the starlit cavern of the fallen mind, hibernating in the dormant winter night of time. They are embryos of life only, infertile seeds, and die within the seed world. The possibility of life within them remains in its embryonic form of abstract ideas, shadows, and dreams. Some of the dreams are troubled visions of the real world, of awakened consciousness. Others are the nightmares of paralyzing horror, which all minds in a stupor of inertia are prey to. Here and there a seed puts out a tentative shoot into the real world, and when it does so, it escapes from the darkness of burial into the light of immortality. Such a seed, however, would only have begun its development, for the vegetable life is not the most highly organized form of life, because it is still bound to nature. The animal symbolizes a higher stage of development by breaking its navel string, and this earthbound freedom of movement is represented in our present physical level. The bird is not a higher form of imagination than we are, but its ability to fly symbolizes one, and men usually assign wings to what they visualize as superior forms of human existence. In this symbolism, the corresponding image of nature would be neither the seedbed of the plant nor the suckling mother of the mammal, but the egg, which has been used as a symbol of the physical universe from the most ancient times. We think of cosmic eggs chiefly in connection with Gnostic or Orphic imagery, but the account of creation in Genesis as a watery chaos surrounded by a shell of firmament, which the Spirit of God, later visualized as a dove, broods upon and brings to life, also has oviparous overtones. In Blake, the firmament is the mundane shell, the indefinite circumference of the physical world through which the mind crashes on its winged ascent to reality. To the inexperienced eye, the egg appears to be a geometrical stone, but the imagination within the egg soon demonstrates that it is something much more fragile. The same is true of the Newtonian universe, the rock rolled against the tomb of divine humanity. Whether we think of the natural man as a seed in the soil, an embryo in the womb, or an unborn chicken in the egg, however, in any event, he is self-centered or egocentric. That is, he is a center of perception. Everything he regards as real, he also regards as outside himself. His senses are all turned outward, towards his reality, and everything he takes, quote, in, immediately becomes unreal and, quote, spectral. Socially and morally, he tries to be an armored crustacean, alert only for attack or defense. I think I read some of these paragraphs in a previous video, and I related it to Jordan Peterson because I thought that was just hilarious how Northrop Frye is saying that. Okay, I'll just repeat the sentence. Socially and morally, he tries to be an armored crustacean, alert only for attack or defense. The price of selfishness is eternal vigilance. The closer society comes to the state of nature, the more tightly men huddle together to be on guard against possible dangers from without. This kind of Argus-eyed tenseness proceeds from a sealed prison of consciousness which Blake calls opaque, opacity being his symbol for the dead matter to which all nature tends, and of which the stone, the infertile egg, the undeveloped seed, the sealed furnace which we met in the four Zoas, and the herd unity of the tyrannical society are all images. As soon as a man acquires anything that can be called wisdom, this hostile and suspicious sphere relaxes, and he begins to be aware of an inner balance. This changes him from a center to a circumference of perception. His imagination begins to surround his experience like an amoeba. He becomes capable of sympathy because he has given other people shelter in his mind, and no longer thinks of them as opaque, and, as he can thereby see through them, he is equally capable of disinterested enmity. This process of mental growth Blake calls opening a center. The man with an opened center is now a microcosm, a little world in himself. This term generally implies that nature is a corresponding macrocosm, an objective universal order to which man should adjust himself. But a macrocosm could only be a larger human body. The end of vision is the living form of humanity, not the mathematic form of nature. But how does one get from one to the other? What relation has the physical appearance of nature to the real mental form or body of man? There is a curious passage in Exodus which tells how Moses went up to Mount Sinai and was permitted to see the, quote, back parts of God. These back parts are traditionally interpreted as the material world, hence Moses' vision was a vision of the totality of mystery, like Job's of Leviathan and John's of the great whore. Here the Bible comes perhaps nearer than any other point to suggesting what is expressed in the Icelandic myth of Ymir, and in Blake by the description of the binding of Urizen by Los in 7 Ages. That nature is the scattered and broken body of a human god, or titan. What we see in nature is our own body turned inside out. From our natural perspective, we cannot see this for the same reason that a fly crawling on a fresco cannot see the picture. We are too small, too close, too unintelligent, and have naturally the wrong kind of eye. But the imagination sees that the labyrinthine intricacies of the movements of the heavenly bodies reflect the labyrinth of our brains. It sees the lakes and pools reflect the passive mirror of the eye. It sees the revolving and warming sun is the beating and flaming heart of the fallen Albion, and is reproduced in the globe of blood within our own bodies. It sees that the tide flows and ebbs in the rhythm of Albion's fallen lungs. It sees that the ridges of mountains across the world are Albion's fractured spine. It sees that the natural circulation of water is a human circulation of blood. It sees that nature is the fossilized form of a god-man, who has, unlike other fossils, the power to come to life again. It sees that what vibration frequencies are to color, what a prosodic analysis is to a poem, what an atomized cadaver is to a body, so the physical world is to the mental one, the seamy side of its reality. And it sees all this because it realizes that when we see ourselves as imprisoned in a huge concave vault of sky, we are seeing from the point of view of a head that is imprisoned in a concave vault of bone. The telescope helps us to escape from this last dilemma, but introduces us directly to a more crucial one. Blake says that everything in eternity has what he calls a, quote, vortex, perhaps rather a vortex ring, a spiral or cone of existence. When we focus both eyes on one object, say a book, we create an angle of vision opening into our minds, with the apex pointing away from us. The book therefore has a vortex of existence opening into its mental reality within our minds. When Milton descends from eternity to time, he finds that he has to pass through the apex of his cone of eternal vision, which is like trying to see a book from the book's point of view, the Lockean conception of the real book as outside the mind on which the vision of the fallen world is based. This turns him inside out, and from his new perspective, the cone rolls back and away from him in the form of a globe. That is why we are surrounded with a universe of remote globes. and are unable to see that the earth is, quote, one infinite plane. But in eternity, the perceiving mind or body is omnipresent, and hence these globes in eternity are inside that body. Before the fall, man was absolute wisdom, and was the circumference of everything. Nothing then existed outside Albion. Sun, moon, stars, and the center of the earth and the depth of the sea were all within his mind and body, a body fully conscious of being alive, not only in its brain, but in all parts of itself down to the feet. Hence, opening a center, as described above, is the imagination's way of reversing the fallen perspective of the world and uniting an individual imagination with the universal one. This union is completed when in our vision the recurrent throb of existence, which we know as time, becomes the pulsating heart of a sleeping man, and the revolving globes in the sky, seen as within instead of outside a human mind and body, become the corpuscles in a human bloodstream, which is also the fourfold river of paradise. That is what Blake means when he says that time is a pulsation of the artery, and space a globule of blood. In eternity, all the homes of the soul, the body, the palace, the city, and the garden are one, and the eternal community of men is also the real presence of a divine body, whose blood is the new wine created from the water of nature. So that's where I'm going to end this week's Fearful Symmetry Friday. It was a pretty long quotation, and I thought there's just tons of interesting things there, so I hope it's something for you to think about, and if you enjoy these types of things, hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you.